Minister Chambers earlier spoke about the Apple tax money having, quote, the capacity to be transformational. He didn't mention, and neither did Minister O'Donoghue actually, that, as Richard has pointed out, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael fought tooth and nail not to take this transformative amount of money, to say that 14 billion euros should stay on the cash pile of one of the biggest, richest corporations in the world. Didn't mention either that they wasted 10 million euros of public money in fighting that case. What happened around Apple tax, I think people will remember. It will be a focal point of the coming general election because it epitomises the reality of politics and the class nature of the society we live in, where, in the words of James Connolly, governments are committees of the rich to manage the affairs of the capitalist class. That the truth of it is that this government puts the profits of big corporations like Apple, big developers, big corporate landlords before the needs of ordinary people. That's the essence of the sort of government that they are. But in any case, now, against your own wishes, we have the money, and actually, I agree with Jack Chambers, this has the capacity to be transformational. But is anyone in the government actually making the case that this is a transformational budget? Where are the transformational changes in this budget? I mean, there's nothing that can be trumpeted as transformational. A few once-off payments, which we'll get to, a few tax breaks, which we'll get to. But where is the state construction company in the context of an unprecedented housing crisis, of record house prices, of record levels of homelessness, of record levels of rent? Where's the public childcare? Public provision of childcare for free at the point of access, in the context of families spending an extra mortgage every month for one kid, an extra 2 mortgages a month for 2 kids. Where's the investment in public transport, in renewable energy, in retrofitting, in the context of the climate catastrophe that we are heading towards? No mention of the building of a national health service, no provision for a special class in every school across the country. There's nothing in this budget that can be pointed at as being transformational. In fact, it's the opposite of a transformational budget. A series of once-off, sometimes twice-off, measures for ordinary people, social welfare, child benefit, reduction in student fees. Even the reduction of public transport fees is continued on a once-off basis. It's the biggest scam ever, this once-off business, where the government gets to come in year after year, announce the same measure that they announced the previous year and expect to get some applause for it. All a very obvious ploy to try and continue the 100-year rule of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. So once-off measures for ordinary people. Permanent tax breaks for the wealthy of various sorts. So we have an extension of the angel investor relief. I'm sure millions of people across the country are breathing a sigh of relief that their angel investments will attract tax relief. Extra incentives, the employment investment incentive, the startup relief for entrepreneurs, startup capital incentive, a series of extensions, capital gains tax relief, a new extension of relief for incorporated farms, in other words, agribusiness. And Fine Gael just put out a tweet, which I agree with their tweet. The tweet is it's a graphic saying Fine Gael is backing business. And one of the headline points that they're highlighting to show how they're backing business proudly: no increase in sick leave days, brackets, which were due to double in January. I mean, in what world is it a bad thing to increase sick day leave? In terms of public health, in terms of workers' rights, but Fine Gael thinks it's a bad thing to do something that was promised. When they originally introduced the sick pay legislation, we said, wait a minute, it's not baked into the legislation that the number of days will increase and increase in the way that you're saying. And the government said, no, you don't need to worry about that, we'll do it by ministerial order. And now, precisely as we warned, you're not doing it. And why? Because Fine Gael is backing business.
Disgraceful.
Backing business at the expense of workers. That's exactly what you're doing. And the reason that this government is not going to introduce a transformative budget, or the next government if you were returned, is because you will not break from your reliance on the market. In other words, you will not break from the prioritisation of profit for Apple, for the corporate landlords, for the private developers, for the private health insurers, for the private hospital providers. Their profit comes before the needs of people affected by the housing crisis, the health crisis, the crisis in terms of additional needs, and so on. What is required is planning, is public ownership, is putting people's needs first, and you're absolutely allergic to that. To go into a bit more detail on some of the areas, in terms of young people, I mean, if anything demonstrates that this is an attempt to buy the election, it is your treatment of young people. Because you're not attempting to buy young people. You're attempting to drive young people out of the country. There's almost nothing in this budget for young people because you've given up on attracting their votes. Your best hope is to simply drive them out. So take the issue of job seekers' allowance for young people. It was one of the horrific measures introduced in the context of the crisis, was to separate out and to create a new rate for under 25s, cutting the dole for people under 25. 16 years later, this discrimination against young people continue. In the context of this massive budget surplus, you're continuing with this discrimination, leaving some young people increasingly driven to live at home because of the housing crisis on €141.70. The issue of so-called sub-minimum wage rates. Passed by this Dáil well over a year ago, then delayed by a year by a bill that we introduced to get rid of these exploitative rates, allowing people to be paid less than the minimum wage. The Low Pay Commission unanimously recommends the end of these sub-minimum wage rates. And there's nothing here in the budget. You're going to continue with these sub-minimum wage rates, allowing the legal super-exploitation of thousands of young workers, allowing them to be paid as little as $9.45. In terms of education, what sums it up is the fact INTO has pointed out that more money has been allocated to the gimmick of this smartphone pouches. You're giving more money for the smartphone pouches to grab a cheap headline than you're giving in terms of increasing capitation for primary schools. I mean, that is absolutely scandalous and demonstrates the lack of priority put on young people. The government refused to introduce a second tier of child benefit for the poorest children in the state, as called for by all the major child welfare and child poverty organisations, including the Children's Rights Allowance. There's a stingy €4 increase to the qualified child allowance for children under 12 and €8 for children 12, and no increase to monthly child benefit rates, doing nothing to address the rates of child poverty situation in this country. 1 in 10 families are reliant on food banks to survive. There's some talk of celebrating the idea that new parents are getting a so-called baby boost of a payment of €420. I can tell from experience that that €420 will not go very far. What will go far, to those who need it the least, is the tax benefit that you're giving to the richest 3% of households in terms of cutting inheritance tax. Certainly the real baby boost to them, gaining a tax benefit of €21,450. Finish with the nothing that is here in terms of the environment. A transformational amount of money to shift the whole nature of the economy, to have a rapid, just transition that improves people's lives. And almost nothing here. Nothing substantial in terms of massive rollout of renewable energy. We should be hearing today about new train lines across the country. We should be hearing today about new metros, about new Lewises. We should be hearing about free public transport right across the board instead of the meagre increase for a very small number of children. Nothing like that whatsoever. The final thing I'll say, the only glint of light in this budget and what we've seen today, I think, is definite evidence for people. A general election is coming, and it's coming very, very soon. It's no accident. I think that payments are due to be rolled out next month and in November. I think it's pretty clear from what's happening today, we're facing an election in the next 6, 7, 8 weeks. That's people's opportunity. I don't think they'll be fooled by this budget. Their opportunity to end 100 years of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, to end 5,000 continuous days of Fine Gael in one form or another, and to elect a left government.